Here's your host, Alan Schnorman. Mr. Schnorman is a distinguished trial attorney, author, and lecturer. Each week, Lawline will bring you the most knowledgeable experts in the field of law today. And now, we introduce our guests and our host, Alan Schnorman.
Welcome to Lawline. Since taking office in 1986, Bronx District Attorney Robert Johnson has taken a very tough stand against crimes involving guns, drugs, and violence. Today we'll meet with Mr. Johnson and find out what he's doing to reduce the number of felonies in the Bronx and how the policies he has put into place has resulted in a higher conviction rate as well as higher jail sentences. Hello, District Attorney Johnson.
How are you?
Good, good. Now, when you took office, there was something about plea bargaining, and you had a very strong stand on plea bargaining. What is it?
Well, that's a few years after I took office, actually, and what we tried to do was turn the system around. When I say that, I mean that it seems like people who were charged with crimes, and obviously those who were going to plead guilty, admitting the guilt, felt that they were entitled to reduced pleas, and they would talk about waiting us out for plea offers. I'm waiting for my third offer, some defendants would say, meaning that they would think the older the case got, the lower the plea offer would be. I tried to turn it around in 1992 by saying that we're going to evaluate the case, make you our best offer before you get indicted. You can waive indictment and plead guilty to a felony before indictment. The criminal procedure law permits that. And if you don't accept it, then either you're going to have to plead guilty to the top charge or try the case, unless we see some meritorious reason. But you're going to have to convince us after that that there's a real reason why you deserve a lesser plea.
Now, I know you were criticized for that in the beginning, and everybody said that there was going to be a tremendous backlog in the Bronx. What happened?
Well, the cases actually began to level off the year subsequent to that for the first time in about 10 years. We've had a backlog all the time, and that's because we don't have enough judges, we don't have enough courtrooms. As it turns out, we're beginning to rise again now, but it's not due to the plea policy. It's due to the fact we have increased arrests. We have the stepped up narcotics initiative in our 46th precinct in the Bronx, where arrests are coming in. Narcotics cases have been growing since the crack epidemic in 1985, 1986. And our plea policy is not responsible for that. I think the failure of the system to address long-term solutions is responsible for that. We have actually 2 judges less hearing criminal court cases in Bronx Supreme Court than we did 10 or 12 years ago. And our caseload has obviously doubled in that time.
Do you find jurors are what we call jury nullification, where a police officer testifies to something and many times they feel that the police officer himself is lying or not telling all the truth?
Well, I can't read a jury's mind. I don't know when they believe a police officer and when they disbelieve a police officer. I know people have said that in police cases sometimes it's very difficult. I will tell you that we are getting convictions in cases where police officers testify. Our trial conviction rate is going up this year. It's perhaps, I believe it's the highest so far this year. At this time in the year, it's the highest our trial conviction rate has been since around 1987, 1986. So jurors are listening to the cases. I think sometimes people have a tendency to take 1 or 2 high-profile cases and say, I don't understand that verdict. You know, I can't figure out what the jury did, and all of a sudden they say that's something that's systemic, and I don't think it's so.
Now, District Attorney Johnson, you've had a number of high-profile cases in the Bronx. One about Officer Lavoti. What happened there?
Well, Officer Lavoti was charged with causing the death of Anthony Baez with criminal negligence, meaning that he should have perceived a risk that he would have caused the death. And the reason we allege he should have perceived a risk was that the police department had trained their officers about choking individuals, and that also the family of Anthony Baez testified that they came out screaming to him that he was asthmatic, and that ultimately Anthony Baez died because of a chokehold. Now, part of his defense was, well, the asthma could have killed him. But in essence, the experts that we put forward all clearly testified that there was nothing in what they observed at the hospital or in the autopsy that indicated this was an asthma-induced death. Asthma was some factor, but it was clear that the medical examiner found he died by compression of the neck and chest.
Were you very surprised with the judge's decision on that?
Well, I think everyone was somewhat surprised with the decision. I didn't understand parts of it, frankly. I think the comments the judge made on Friday, the verdict having come in on a Monday, the Friday before, the judge made comments shaking his head in the negative during the defense summations, talking about a nest of perjury, which to me meant that he wasn't talking about the one police officer that we offered, or that we said was telling the truth, but the others that testified and had tried to either say they didn't see what happened or exonerate Lavoni.
Right.
So I think there were contradictory things in his decision.
Okay. Now, another very high publicity case you had in the Bronx had to do, in fact, you were criticized by Governor Pataki as well as Mayor Giuliani. Can you tell us about that? The death case?
You're talking about the death of Police Officer Gillespie?
Yes.
Officer Gillespie was killed in a very violent incident. We mourn his loss, and there's nothing we can do about his loss. We certainly believe that we want to protect as many police officers as we can, and our feeling is that we didn't get the opportunity to do that in this case. The governor stepped in, did not allow me to make any decisions in the case. The statute permits the DA to decide whether or not to seek the death penalty or life without parole. I never made a decision in that case. It's true that I said some things that raised people's attention, and I thought that was my obligation, to let my voters know how I felt about the use of this tool that the legislature gave us and that the governor gave us. It's simply a tool. They said the DA decides the death or life without parole for submission to the jury. And they didn't give us any criteria, but I indicated to my voters that, among other things, in addition to the facts of the case and the nature of the defendant, we had to consider what the potential downside was, and that included the lengthy process, the motions that the defense would file. They're going to hit us with every motion possible
Right.
when death is an option. They're going to hire every expert possible. The cost has been estimated at $2 to $5 million for a death case, as opposed to $500,000 for life without parole. And
One death case.
One death
It
case
would cost that much.
$2 to $5 million are the estimates. And that says nothing about the time and effort that both sides put into this case. We just talked about the congestion in the system, and that's not to minimize these cases. They're very big cases, they're very important cases, but we also have a new severe option. Life without parole is something we never had in New York State before now.
So now, you never told the governor you weren't going to seek the death penalty. You never told the mayor.
No, what I told the governor was, I don't believe you have the right to come into Bronx County and ask me what my policies are. You don't ask the other 61 DAs what their policies are. That's the way the system is set up, that each county elects its own district attorney. That district attorney answers to his or her electorate, and we have different policies about different things.
Do you feel this was a political decision?
I can't answer for what his decision was. I know my decision was that I felt very comfortable in explaining to the people of my county what criteria I would use, and I felt very comfortable in explaining to the governor that the statute gave me the discretion, not him. He signed the bill. He should have known that.
Now, it seems almost commonplace now that we can turn on the TV and we see politicians criticizing judges as well as district attorneys for their policy. How do you feel about that?
Well, I feel that if you're an executive, a mayor or a governor, you're going to be asked about issues. And I feel that they would not look right if they didn't answer the questions that the media puts to them. However, I think there's a way to do it and a way not to do it. I think you can criticize the decision, but I don't think you should necessarily call for the removal of a judge based on one decision. I think you need to find a pattern. Now, yeah, we're going to disagree with judges, we're going to disagree with DAs, we don't always all agree with each other. And I think the nature sometimes of the criticism, the volume serves no purpose. It adds to people questioning the system. So what I try to do is calmly explain to people what it is that I'm doing and why, and have them understand it. And I think people understand that. If you're not yelling and screaming, they hear you. And I think one of the most important factors to see, especially in terms of the criticism of me, is that I've been a friend of the police department, that I put in policies that backed up the police department when they get assaulted. I made sure that our assistants would never make a decision in the cases of assault on an officer without speaking to the officer. That's my policy in my office. We've prosecuted people who've assaulted officers. We've not done everything in our power to oppose the death penalty, because that's not what we're about. We've sent an assistant DA to Florida to testify in a death case because we had evidence with regards to a prior Bronx case that was relevant. We sent a defendant back to California to stand trial on a death case because we felt that they asked to try him first before our Bronx case. We felt that was appropriate.
D.A. Johnson, what is your opinion on the death penalty?
My opinion on the death penalty is that it does not give you what you think you're going to get. That what it really addresses is anger, and we have a right to be angry with all the violence on our streets. But I think we need to think about how it is going to impact and what you're going to get for it. And I haven't seen any evidence that it's a deterrent. In the state of Texas, where it's used, for instance, hasn't been shown to be a deterrent. In the state of New Jersey, that's had it for 14 years, nobody's been executed. And we're spending all this money, we're doing complex trials, we're having separate penalty phases, we're risking putting innocent people to death. So I think that you really have to have a drastic case in order to overcome that burden.
Now, you were elected by the citizens of the Bronx. How do you feel when a state political figure, whether it's the governor or anyone else, takes a case away from you and could very well take another case away from you in the future? What would be your position on that?
Well, I don't think that's just right, and that's why we filed an Article 78 proceeding,
saying that he was arbitrary and capricious in his actions?
That he had no legal basis for his action, and we lost that in the Bronx Supreme Court. We're now in the appellate division of the Supreme Court, and I presume that whoever loses in the appellate division will appeal to the Court of Appeals, the highest court in the state, and we'll get a decision from the Court of Appeals, because there are two contradicting statutes here. The death penalty statute, and actually it's not a death penalty statute, it's a statute that gives the death penalty as one of two sentencing options. That statute says the DA has the discretion. The other statute, the superseder statute, says the governor can supersede. However, the Court of Appeals has said there may come a day where they limit that. I think this is the case, because he hasn't superseded because of any allegation of corruption or bias on my part. He superseded because he doesn't like the way I've said I'm going to make decisions in a case.
He doesn't like the way you're running your office in these particular cases.
Right. And in addition to our suit, actually, there was also a suit on a parallel track that was brought by some of the voters of the county who indicated their belief that he's in essence disenfranchised them.
Now, you have a little unique background, which I'd like to go into because it really enhances your experience. You started out in legal aid, representing defendants.
Indigent defendants, criminal defendants.
Then you went to prosecution and became an assistant district attorney in the Bronx.
That's right. Both of those were in the Bronx.
Then prosecuting the same type of people that previously you defended.
Correct.
Then after that, you became a judge.
That's right.
You were a criminal court judge still in the Bronx.
Most of it in the Bronx. 8 months I did in Queens, but all of the last 21 years in criminal justice has been in the Bronx.
You went from one side of the bar to the other side of the bar, and now you're on the bench. And then after that, you said, I'm not going to be a judge anymore, but I'm going to be the district attorney of Bronx County. Now, certainly you have very many hats that you wore in your experience. Now, judges have been attacked continuously now. It appears that you cannot turn on a TV without a week going by without some criticism of a judge. In fact, recently, the chief administrative judge of the Bronx was criticized by the mayor because the mayor felt that the bail he set on a particular case was not adequate.
Right.
Now, wearing all these hats that you've worn over your professional career, how does a judge feel when not only does a politician, whether it's the mayor or the governor, criticize him, and even in one case in Brooklyn has called for the judge's removal because they didn't like the judge's decision?
Well, the case in Brooklyn involves what's the charges allege a pattern of statements and issues that may show, and that's the allegation, it may show a bias against the people. So that's a little bit different. But in individual cases, what I believe, and I think you'll see this by the way I operate, is that I don't jump up and down and criticize people. I haven't been one of those that did that. You asked me about a particular judge's decision. I gave you my opinion of it. I think I did it in a reasoned, lawyer-like way. I hope I did. Same thing with the administrative judge of the Bronx. I asked for...
That's Judge Roberts.
That's Judge Roberts, who is a good friend, but we don't agree on everything, and when we disagree, we both take our positions very strongly. But we recommended bail in the case where he said what the mayor considered low bail. I recommended much higher bail than what the judge said. I believe the judge was wrong. I wouldn't have said what I said if I didn't think it was right.
What were the facts of that case?
That was an incident in which 2 police officers went to a domestic dispute, and during the course of trying to arrest the husband in the dispute, one of the police officers fell and was impaled in part on a piece of glass from a mirror,
Right.
and lost his life. We went to the grand jury and sought manslaughter charges, saying that the defendant disregarded the risk. The grand jury came back with criminally negligent homicide charges, which is a lower level, saying that he failed to perceive a risk, but he didn't perceive and then disregard a risk. However, we asked for bail because of the defendant's prior criminal history and the fact that in prior, less serious cases, he had failed to appear in court. So we felt that if he failed to appear in court for misdemeanors, now he's charged with causing the death of a police officer, we may never see him again.
We'll continue with this, but we have to take a break now. You're watching Lawline. I'm Ellen Schnorman, your host. Stay with us.
The air dances with the waters, which brings the rain that feeds the land, that is home to the animals. All life dances together.
In a world so connected, choosing one environmental cause can be hard. EarthShare is 40 environmental charities working together. You and your company can help by calling 1-800-MY-SHARE.
All life lives, or doesn't, together.
Excuse me, do you wear your safety belt?
Why, no, I don't wear my safety belt.
Thank you.
You could learn a lot from a dummy. Buckle your safety belt.
Thousands of women will lose a child to AIDS simply because they didn't get an HIV test when they were pregnant. You see, there's now treatment that can help stop the spread of HIV from mother to baby, which gives children of HIV-infected mothers something they never had before: a chance. If you're pregnant, please get an HIV test.
Hello, you're watching Lawline. We're honored to have today the District Attorney of Bronx County, Robert Johnson. Right before the break, we were talking about the case where the administrative judge of the Bronx, Burton Roberts, was criticized by Mayor Giuliani for giving a bail, which the mayor felt was too low, and so did you. Can you tell us what is the balance of your opinion on that?
Well, basically what I was saying is that we had reasons why we asked for high bail. So, in essence, I disagree with the judge, but the judge is the final person to decide whether it's enough bail to ensure the return of the defendant to court. So the question is, how do you voice your disagreement? I don't think that was an abuse of discretion. That was his discretion, and I think judges have to understand that what they do in public, and sometimes there are going to be people who criticize, and it's not an easy job. That's why we select the best lawyers. We go through this process of weeding out lawyers with at least 10 years of experience, and then going through committees to evaluate them. It's a tough job, and they need to understand that also.
District Attorney Johnson, if Mayor Giuliani and Governor Pataki were watching this show right now, what would you like to say to them regarding their criticism of the bench, as well as your office?
Well, I think they've understood what I've said. I've said that I'm going to do my job to the best of my ability based on my 21 years of criminal justice experience in the state courts. I know the mayor has experience as a prosecutor. I don't think it was in the state courts. And I think that I would ask them to respect that. I understand they're not always going to agree with it, but I think they need to respect it.
And and again, I'm sure you're going to pursue it if the governor ever wants to take you off another capital case. I assume you'll pursue it in the courts?
Well, we'll see. I don't know what the courts are going to say about the first case. If they say that he has the right to do that, then we'll have to see if the facts of the next case differ.
Many judges on this show have criticized police officers for coming before them ill-prepared, and in some cases coming before them wearing what they considered inappropriate attire. Dungarees, T-shirts, and simple questions asked of them, and they said, let me go to my memo book. And that was just the date that they were at the scene, and everything going to the memo book. What have you found in that case?
Well, I find that's true with some police officers. It's true with some witnesses. Sometimes people, obviously most times, people are nervous to be on the stand. I've been present when I took statements from defendants as an assistant DA testifying is very different than being on the other end asking the questions. So I understand that. With any witness, we have to be concerned about how they're dressed, what their demeanor is, whether or not they know what questions we're going to ask them, and that there's a certain amount of preparation that has to be done. That's why we've done a couple of things. We've enhanced our training of our lawyers so they know what kind of issues they have to deal with, and also we've participated in the police department's training. We've sent assistants down to the police academy to help them train lawyers, police officers under what circumstances they're going to undergo cross-examination and the like. I think sometimes when people come into a job, they don't understand the whole job. I mean, and I think the average citizen's perception of the policing job is to run around out in the street and catch bad guys. And maybe sometimes there's detective work involved, but the average citizen believes that that job ends when the cuffs are put on. But testifying is a part of that, and I think a lot of young police officers don't really, that kind of smacks them in the face the first few times they have to testify. They haven't thought about that as being part of the job. The case is not through until the trial is over. So we try to calmly and professionally show them what they're going to confront, and with time and experience, they're going to be able to deal with those issues. But it's part their responsibility and part our responsibility.
What would you like to tell your constituents in the Bronx, as well as all our viewers? Crime is probably the #1 concern of all our citizens in the New York area. We're in an urban center. You can't travel a subway car without thinking, is there a weapon in my car here that I'm traveling with? Or if I get pushed by somebody, I don't want to start up because you never know. What are we doing? What's the situation regarding crime?
Well, I think we're trying to address their concerns in many ways. We're sending our assistants out to the community boards and the precinct councils, so we hear the specific concerns from each of the 12 boards and 12 precinct councils in the Bronx. We know what neighborhood has what concern, so we can address them and fine-tune our work to what their needs are. We've attacked the drug gangs. We've helped bring down major drug gangs like CNC Company and the Wild Cowboys. I think that, in addition to the additional cops that Mayor Dinkins put on the force, in addition to the new policing that Mayor Giuliani and Commissioners Bratton and Safer have done, I think the work that the DAs have done targeting major drug gangs is one of the contributing factors in driving down violent crime. I think statistically we've shown the plea policy that we spoke about earlier shows we can be tough on crime. The fact that the Bronx is less than a percentage point below the statewide average for the overall conviction rate, pleas and trials of felony cases, and yet for the first 3 months of this year, which is the most recent statistics that I've seen, we were 15 percentage points above the statewide average for sending convicted felons to jail. So I think we've addressed the concerns of people, but I think what people need to understand is that we can't only fight crime with these short-term solutions. Hitting hard is necessary. Incarcerating dangerous people is necessary. But we have to start thinking about finding ways to give hope, education, job opportunities to the young people who are out there adrift.
So if you're going to commit a crime in the Bronx, you be prepared to go to jail. Is that what you're...
You certainly have a better chance of going to jail in the Bronx than in a lot of places around the state.
Now, you mentioned youths and juveniles. Guns in our schools. What's the story about that?
It's frightening. Shouldn't be. Shouldn't have to... Our youngsters shouldn't have to endure that. I am the father of 2 sons. One of them is going to be 16 next month, and he's been in the public schools all his life. I don't want drugs or guns around my children or anybody else's children. The first day I became DA, I got tougher about drugs in the vicinity of a school. I got tougher on the possession of illegal loaded guns. Sometimes I think I'm preaching to a deaf ear, though, because we haven't really reached the judges on the danger that that guns pose for our citizens. Well, judges in the Bronx are sentencing 60% of our defendants to less than a year in jail, and it's a statute that the citizens think mandates a year in jail.
Well, I remember when the statute came down, Mayor Koch said, if you're caught with a gun, you're going to jail for at least a year. And what's happening?
Well, the statute has exceptions in it, and unfortunately, I think this is an instance in where most of the judiciary has made the exception the rule, and I don't believe that's the way the statute was meant to operate. That's why I personally went into the appellate division to argue an appeal. Unfortunately, the appellate division didn't get the message either. We lost that appeal. They say it's within the judge's discretion.
Let's talk about, what about juveniles with guns and juveniles with crimes? What are they charged with? What's happening to them?
Well, when you say juvenile, it's a
Under
technical
16.
term in the law, actually under 16, and the mere possession of a gun, we cannot charge a juvenile as an adult. There has been some discussion of being tougher against juveniles. I think that's one of the areas in which a 14, 15-year-old understands the nature of the act.
So if a 14-year-old brings a loaded .45 into school, you're saying he cannot be charged as an adult?
No. We have to wait till they shoot you to charge him as an adult.
Well, what happens to the guy? You caught him with the gun.
He goes to family court, and the family court deals with him, which is a law that I'm not totally conversant with. I've never practiced it.
Does that mean he may not go to jail?
He could go to what they call a secure facility, a youth detention center.
Now, what's your opinion about that, if you had your way?
I think that's one of the crimes that I would say, look, you're old enough to know what damage you're going to do with this gun. You need to pay for it as an adult. We've made that decision about other violent crimes, rape, robbery, murder. We're charging 14 and 15-year-olds with all of those. We're charging 13-year-olds with murder. I think some of these things that put us in jeopardy we need to bring into the adult system.
Let's go back to drugs. Are drugs on the increase or are they on the decrease? What's the story?
Well, they are certainly out there. I've read reports about young people not decreasing their use, and then I've read other reports saying it's back on the upswing. They're certainly on the streets of our city still. There still is a market for it, and that's why I think when I talk about long-term solutions, what I'm saying is that in addition to saying things like let's get tougher on juveniles, we also have to say let's reach them before they become a problem. Let's talk to them, let's embrace them before they reach for a gun, before they reach for a vial of crack.
If I gave you the ability to talk directly to the legislature, to talk to the executive, the governor, and they would listen to you, how would you change the system?
I would say two things. I would say we need more judges in courtrooms because we're dealing with a 1990 crime level, 1996 crime level with the resources of the early 1980s.
So that comes out of a budget. That's a budgetary item.
Well, they're both budgetary items because I'd say we also need to put the money into youth services and education so we reach these youngsters before they become a problem. We're not going to see the result of that for 5 or 10 years, but we will see the result of it.
Do you feel longer jail term is the answer or something else?
I think both. I think there are certain violent predators that need to be put away for longer times, but I think in the long term, if we can prevent crime, we will have more of an impact.
And what if somebody's charged and charged again and again with multiple crimes? What's your feeling on that?
Well, we have a statute that certain violent felons and actually certain felons in New York State are eligible for either mandatory or discretionary persistent treatment, meaning that with 3 felonies they get a life sentence. Although I think we may need to put more of them away without the opportunity of parole.
And in the minute we have left, how would you change the criminal justice system if you could do it?
Well, I would make the criminal justice system just broader. I think that's the main thing we can do. I think we certainly can, with respect to juveniles, we can take away this youthful offender status, juveniles and youthful offenders, if they get convicted of another crime. I'm not saying don't give them the opportunity, but I'm saying if they commit another crime, then they have lost the right to have that. And I think we can pass a bill that says you get youthful offender, but if you commit another crime, that's gone.
You heard it here.
That sends a message. And I think we also need to pass bills that say we're going to teach you how to get a job, we're going to teach you how to stay out of trouble, we're going to teach you how to avoid drugs.
District Attorney Robert Johnson, thank you very much for appearing on Law Line. And as always, this is Alan Schnorman, and thank you for watching Law Line.
You have been watching Law Line with your host, New York trial attorney Alan Schnorman. Mr. Schnorman will be back with you next week at the same time. If you have any questions about this week's program, please write to Law Line, 63 Wall Street, New York, New York, 10005, or call area code 212-432-9111. This program was made possible by